right, hello, Algebra 1. You're going to be listening and filling in your notes. I have the notes right up here for you. And we're going to be looking at activity 532. And we're going to start with this story. And so, iPhones, yes, our book is that funny that they use iPhones as their story. And so, teenagers and Hollywood celebrities flock to an exclusive shop in Beverly Hills, California yesterday, clamoring for the new iPhone. The store expects to start selling 100 and then expects to sell an average of 15 more each week. I plan to stand in line all night, Nellie Hillman said. As soon as I own one, I'll be cooler than everyone else. Across the globe, millions of fans buy iPhones. So what I would like you guys to do is to pause the video here and to tell me if they start, so at week 0, they start with 100 iPhones, what would be week 1 if they sold an average of 15% more? Okay, go ahead and pause. See if you can figure out in 1 week, and then join me back when you figure that out. All right, welcome back, Algebra 1. Let's see if what you were thinking was correct. Now, I'm going to be writing some stuff up here at the top, just to probably model what some of you did. So, we're going to be taking 15% of 100, because I'm going to be selling 15 more. So, some of you might have done this. What is 15% of or times 100? Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with your calculators have a percent key. It is second left parentheses. It looks like that, okay? And so you can take 100 times 15% and you're gonna get, there it is, 15. So what does that mean then? Does that mean we're just selling 15? We're taking a total. How many iPhones have they sold total? And so they sold 100 already. And so then they sold 15 more. So 100 plus that 15, they should have, or you should have in week 1, 115 iPhones. Okay, let's do the same thing with this one. Well, every week they sell 15% more. So they've now sold 115, and they're going, okay, to sell 15% more. So we have 115 times 15%. Put that in your calculator. Okay, and here's what it looks like. So 115 times 15%. I'll show you with my calculator. Yeah, you're going to get some decimals here, and that's okay. So we know for right now that you can't sell a quarter or 0.25 of a phone. We're going to leave it just for right now. So that means I've sold 17.25 more iPhones than the previous week. So I'm going to add that to my 115. And you should get 132.25 iPhones. Now, we could keep going like this. Or we could really stop and ask ourselves, we have a sequence here. In fact, we have a geometric sequence. And whenever we talk about percentages and tables, we are looking at what is the multiplier. So I want you guys to think about, you can multiply each number by 15% and then add it to the previous number, which is fine. But there is something that we can multiply by to get from 100 to 115 to get to 130.25. So pause the video now and see if you can figure that out. Okay. All right, guys, welcome back. Hopefully you've had a chance to figure out that multiplier. Let's talk about maybe what you found. And so I don't know what I would multiply 100 by to get 115 or 115 to get 132.25. Okay, I don't know what I'm multiplying by. So if I don't know what I'm multiplying by, I'm going to take a step backwards and I'm going to divide. Okay, if you don't know what to multiply by, go backwards and divide. So in my calculator, I'm going to take 115 divided by 100. That's my step backwards. Notice I'm going backwards. 115 divided by 100. Ooh, and there it is, 1.15. That's interesting, 1.15. I wonder where that 0.15 means. We're definitely going to talk about it. Okay, so now let's just check. Always check your work. So I have 100 times 1.15. There's 115 times 1.15. There's 132 times 1.15. I have 152 plus some decimal, which we know you're not going to be able to sell that decimal by phone. Okay, pi phone. That's what we're looking at. Okay, so now let's answer some questions about what we just figured out. So what is the multiplier, i.e. the SG? Well, our SG was 1.15. What do you guys think that 0.15 represents? I'm really hoping you all see that it is, okay, 15%. The one out in front, right here, this is, you always start with the one because percentages always start at 100%. So there's we have 100% of our phones being sold. Then every week we add 15%. So 1 plus 15% is 1.15. This right here represents that 15%. This represents, I start with what I have, what I started with. I start with my 100%. And you're always going to start with the one. Okay, when you talk about percentages, you're always going to start with whatever you start with. That's 100% of whatever you start with. Okay, so let's talk explicit equation. Well, explicit, guys, is exactly what we've been studying. Explicit is, okay, I know it's geometric. We're in sequence world still. Okay, I started with 100 phones, and then to build my sequence, I multiplied by 1.15 and I raise it to the n power. There it is. Okay, let's take a look at our recursive equation. Okay, our recursive equation is the same thing, remember, but we start off with t of n plus 1 equals t of n. I'm geometric, so I'm multiplying by 1.15, and my t of 0 is 100. Okay, so we want to know 52 weeks, i.e. a year. What happens in 1 year? Well, how can we do that? Well, which equation allows us to jump anywhere we want to in a sequence? Well, it's the explicit. So I'm going to put that into my equation 52 into the explicit, and we're going to use our calculators. So t of 52, wherever I see an n, I'm going to plug in 52. All right, everybody in your calculators, put that in there. 100 parentheses 1.15 parentheses caret to the 52 power. Ooh, that is some fabulous profit there. Okay, and so what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to just round it. And so the 53.1, we're going to round it. Okay, we're going to round it to the nearest whole. That 3 either stays 3 or it becomes a 4. So I look at the number next to it, it's a 6, so I'm going to round it up to 4. So they will be selling 143,314 pi phones. Okay. Notice how we begin to use our sequences and our equations to figure out some of those, what happens in the future, make those predictions. Okay. Okay. Well, the way our country works and the way consumerism works is we have a competitor. Okay. And this competitor is the Pyroid. And the Pyroid, they expect to sell 10,000. Okay, they're going to sell 10,000 of these, and they're only going to increase, okay, by 7%. So I want you to think, and we're going to do explicit first. It doesn't quite say that, but we're going to do explicit first. So think about, we start with 10,000 and we gain 7% every week. Pause the video here and see if you can write the explicit for this one. Okay. All right, guys, welcome back. So let's talk about the explicit for this problem. We know it's geometric because anytime we deal with percentages, it's always going to be geometric. And we know we're going to start with 10,000 thyroid phones. Now the question is what are we going to put as our multiplier? So let's go back to the logic of the first problem. You always start with your original. We sold this 10,000. That represents 100%. 100% is a decimal is 1. So we start with the original amount, but then we are going to increase or add 7%. Please be careful when you're writing percents. 7% is 0.07. It is not, okay, 0.7. We'll talk a lot about this, but you have to remember what percent means what. So 0.7 is not 7%. So all I'm doing is I'm taking the original amount and adding 7%. But that looks kind of clumsy. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 plus 0.07 is just 1.07. Look at that multiplier. It tells you so much. I get to keep my original 10,000 sold, but I'm adding 7% each week. Okay. All right, let's write that recursive equation. Recursive is going to start off the same way as before. T of n plus 1 equals T of n. But this time my multiplier is 1.07. And I started with 10,000 thyroid phones. Okay, so here's a what if scenario. What happens if all of a sudden sales increase to 17% each week instead of 7%? How would our equation, our explicit equation, change? So I'm going from 7% to 17% now. So let's talk about how this would look. So T of n equals, I still started with my original, okay? Our original is going to be there. Now, what happens is there's my original, but instead of 7, I'm now increasing by 17%. Notice when we look at the percentages in our equations, we have to turn them into the decimal form, which is okay. It just means it's going to be 0.17. And so there's my equation. But again, we want to clean that up a little bit so it looks kind of like what we've been doing before, that 1 plus. So 1 plus 1.7 is 1.17 raised to the n. And there is my equations, guys. That is how we work with multipliers. Okay. So if I said it increased by 25%, your multiplier would be 1.25. If I said it increased by 30%, it would be 1.30. Hopefully pretty intuitive. All right, go ahead and turn this over, and we're going to look at the back. Now, the back here, guys, is, what happens when everything is going really well for the company, and all of a sudden they hit a wall of sales and they decrease 3%. So pyroids are taken off. They sold 10,000. Then there was an increase of 7%. And then we looked at, it went up to 17%. But now this year, they have a decline in sales. So how many phones would you have week 1 if you lost 3%? Okay. Pause the video here and see if you can fill out this table, okay, this table right here, okay, with what would happen if you lost 3% of your sales every week. All right, guys, welcome back. Let's take a look and see what you guys came up with. So it's very much like that first problem when we were looking at. So if I start with 10,000 phones, okay, and I take 3% of that. All right, so I'm going to take 3% of that, 10,000 times 3%. So 10, remember, I'm going to put this in my calculator so you guys can see it. 10,000 times 3%. Make sure you put that percent in there. Okay. I get 300. So does that mean I only sell 300 phones week 1? No, that's what I lost. Okay, so what's 10,000 minus 300? Okay, that's the number of phones that I have. Remember, I lost 3%. So I lost 300 phones in my sales. So 10,000 minus 300 is 9,700 phones. Okay. So I know that week 1, I've only sold 9,700. Okay, so let's try that again. So we know that in week 1, my sales were down, but I continue to drop 3%. So take 9,700 times 3%, and you get 291. That doesn't mean I sold 291. It means I lost 291 phones in my sales that week. So 9,700 minus 291. Okay, that gives me 9,409. So we could go back to that. You can take 3% of this number and then subtract it from that number. But is there one multiplier? What is the multiplier that gets me from 10,000 to 9,700 to then 9,700 to 9,409? So what's the multiplier? Pause the video here and see if you can figure out that multiplier. Just one number that we can use to multiply to build this table. All right, welcome back. So again, if you are confused by the multiplier, have a strategy. I'm going to work backwards. And so I don't know 10,000 times 9 times what gives me 9,700. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work backwards. So 9,700 divided by 10,000. Notice I'm working backwards. Oh, and look at that multiplier. I get 0.97. Huh. Interesting. Where do you think that 0.97 comes from? Okay, because we know we're losing 3%. Where's the 3% hidden in this multiplier? Well, let's find out. Okay, so we know that our SG for this problem is 0.97. But where does that come from? Well, what I want you guys to remember is, oh, it's a percent problem. We always start with 100%. We always start with 1. Because we have 100% or 10,000 phones, we still start with that. So, but this time, we're not gaining, so we're not adding, we are losing 3%. Notice how I wrote 3%. So in your calculators, everybody, take, okay, in your calculators, take 1 minus 0.03 or 3%. What's 100 minus 3%? That's what that means in decimal form. Boom. And there it is, 0.97. So when you are multiplying by a decreasing percentage, you have to think about what percent are you keeping. We kept 97% of our product. We lost 3%. So what you multiply by is what you keep. Hey, write the explicit. All right, explicit, we're getting good at this. So my explicit equation is I started with 10,000. Okay, and I multiplied by 0.97 and raised it to the n power. There it is. And my recursive is going to be just like we always start. T of n plus 1 equals T of n. I'm multiplying by 0.97. And I started at T of 0 of 10,000. All right, guys, we are going to, at this point, just practice creating the multipliers. Okay, and so you're going to be doing 6 multipliers. I'm going to give you all of them. However, you are going to, I'm not going to give you the answer to all of them. So I want you just to think about it. And if you want to think about it in terms of phones and being sold, you can think about, I sold 100 phones and my sales increased by something. Okay, so your first one is, what would be the multiplier if we had an increase in sales by 8%? So how would you represent the multiplier? So pause the video here, see if you can figure out the multiplier. Okay, welcome back. So let's talk multiplier. Multiplier would be, I start with my 100% and it's increasing by 8%. So my multiplier is 1.08. Now remember, if you really had to put this in an equation, you could start writing it like this. T of n, you can think of it like this. You have 100 phones, pi phones, and that's your multiplier. We're looking for that. What are you always multiplying by? So if that's easier for you to think about, okay, that's okay. You can think about that. That 8%. Okay, next one. What happens if I have a sales, okay, and unfortunately for my company, it decreases by 4%. What would be the multiplier? I see a decrease in sales by 4%. Okay, pause the video here. See if you can figure out the multiplier. All right, guys, welcome back. Okay. Remember when we talk about multipliers, we always start with that 100%. So I'm going to start with 1, but this time I decrease 4%. So 4% written as a decimal is 0.04. And when I subtract, okay, 1 minus 0.04, I get 0.96. So my multiplier, what I'm keeping is 96% or 0.96 of my original product. It's like our bouncy ball ratio. I'm only recovering 96% of the original bounce. I multiply by what I keep. All right, guys, the rest, I'm going to have you guys try this. So see if you can figure out an increase by 73%, a decrease by 73%, an increase of, we'll do 25%, and a decrease by 40%. Okay. So your job is to finish these 4, make sure your name is on this paper and turn it in. Hope multipliers with percentages, it's a little bit more understandable. We'll definitely be practicing it. Have a great rest of your day, Algebra 1.